Hello, everyone. Welcome to the National Widowers Organization monthly Zoom meeting, where we seek to provide grief support for those who have lost a spouse, partner, or any significant loved one. The NWO and Men's Grief Network is a nonprofit group bringing men together in grief. Our organization is led by experts in loss, many of whom are widowers and others who have grieved significant losses. The NWO offers free of charge resources, including articles, blogs, books, peer-to-peer support, and more to help men during this very difficult time and beyond. As men, we don't have to go through a loss alone, whether it be the loss of a spouse, child, parent, friend, or sibling. I'm NWO board member and fellow widower Ken Levy, your host. Our topic tonight is rituals for healing grief. Tonight's educator is Matthew Morse. Matt is a New York City-based psychotherapist specializing in helping adults navigate anxiety, addictions, and major life transitions, such as death, divorce, or serious medical diagnosis. Matt has a very diverse background that ultimately led him to his current field. After studying philosophy in college, he spent 2 years studying and practicing Tibetan Buddhism in Nepal and India, and a year living in Tokyo. Upon his return to the US, Matt studied English literature at the graduate level, moved to New York, and forged a career in journalism for over 15 years. During the recession of '08, Matt was laid off from a magazine he helped to found, and in the process of working through professional and personal losses, he went back to his roots and decided to train as an interfaith spiritual chaplain at Mount Sinai Hospital. Matt went on to work at Calvary Home Hospice for 6 years, first as a spiritual counselor and then as a bereavement counselor. He holds an MA in clinical counseling from Fordham University. After the conversation with Matt concludes, we're going to have a Q&A, so be sure to share comments and questions with us in the chat box. Please send them all throughout the event. If Matt says something that triggers a thought or comment, we'll get to as many as we can. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Matt.
All right. Thank you, Ken. It's an honor to be here at the Men's Grief Network. I was here about a little over a year ago, and I've watched a lot of the videos, and there's a lot of some heroes in the industry that you guys have had on. So Kenneth Doka and Joseph Neumeier. So I was trained reading their work, so it's an honor to be here. This evening, I'm going to be discussing healing rituals. Less the new agey ritual that people think of, and more traditional rituals or artistic rituals. So healing rituals. And by way of telling you about me, in March of 23, I was here, and during that talk, I outlined 10 things I did to heal from a breakdown caused by piling on of stressors back in 2011, back when I was 48 years old. Now I'm 61. So my personal heartbreak did not include the death of my wife, thank God, but was brought on by the death of two close friends that were about my age, also in their 40s, late 40s. One was a death by suicide out of nowhere, and the other was death by a sudden heart attack. And in addition, I had recently been pushed out of a magazine that I'd helped to found, and my marriage was going through a difficult patch. So I had a lot of piling on of stressors, we call it in the world of psychotherapy, and then a bit of a breakdown. So some of the 10 suggestions that I gave last March 2023 here included common things that all of us use to heal probably from our grief and on our grief journey, including exercise, private therapy, group therapy, bibliotherapy, or reading books, self-help books and others, scriptotherapy or journaling and writing, going to music festivals. That was a big part of my healing. And I also started to experiment with some healing psychedelic substances then with my friends in small amounts, very safe. But at the very top of my list of 10 healing activities, at number 1, I placed the reinvigoration of my practice of Tibetan Buddhism. I'd sort of, my practice had kind of fallen off, or my inspiration towards it had fallen off. I'd gone through a dry spell. I always kept a hand in it, but when I went through this period of grief, I threw myself into it. I decided to prioritize my practice of Tibetan Buddhism as the most important refuge in my life. And I found that the compassionate and transcendent view of the sophisticated daily practice really helped me to slowly heal, to let go of painful experiences, to become more expansive, to take things less solid. Most spiritual practices, not just Buddhist practices, but most practices are long on fundamental truths such as learning to rest in present awareness, or the here and now, and also forgiveness. So those three things are big. I'd say present awareness, a sense of spaciousness, and forgiveness or compassion towards self and other. And so tonight I'm going to do a deep dive into the importance of developing a daily practice of healing rituals, as I feel that they can lead us not just to getting back to our baseline, but can even offer the possibility of what we sometimes call in the world of psychotherapy post-traumatic growth. As opposed to post-traumatic stress disorder, there's post-traumatic growth. And I know that sounds a little arrogant, and that won't happen for all of us. Many of us will be lucky if we just get back to our baseline. But for some people, they do, it's a commonplace, and maybe it's bandied about too easily, but you can grow through suffering, if you approach it the right way. Now, my particular system of daily practice rituals, again, is informed by Tibetan Buddhism, but my hope is that by example, these can also inform and help people to develop their own healing ritual, whether they're Christian, Jewish, Muslim, or even secular existential. But I guess this begs the question, what is ritual? So ritual, the word ritual stems from the word rite, which stems from the Latin word ritus or ritus. And synonyms for ritual include custom, habit, ceremony, liturgy, practice, routine. And ritual has a lot of religious connotations, absolutely. But the fact is that our lives are largely shaped by rituals, most of them secular, of course. And so it's good. The first thing we need to do is to become aware of how our lives are shaped by ritual. And ritual can be found in everything we do, from how we brush our teeth. We have a toothbrushing ritual in the morning, to the rites of passage that define our graduations, marriage ceremonies, funerals, and other life events. Other rituals include bathing rituals, daily exercise, cooking, eating, house cleaning, and even the World Series is ritualized. All the sports, there's a ritual beginning, middle, and end. Even the way we greet each other, handshaking or kissing or bumping knuckles as we did in the pandemic, and the structure and ending of a dinner party are also shaped by ritual. So ritual is basically a template where you know in advance that there is a beginning, a middle, and an end to a given activity, and that activity has a certain purpose, focus. Now, Tibetans call a given set of mind training rituals a sadhana. So that's a fancy name for just a practice ritual. But what's important, no matter what your tradition, whether it's faith-based or secular, is that you inquire into yourself and eventually reveal what matters the most to you. And you use the same words and melodies every day. Once you develop a ritual of beginning, middle, and end, often with words, but it can be wordless. And the thing is, you do it every day. And there's the consistency. And against that, you get to really know your mind and what state your mind is. And if you have mission drift and you find that you're slipping away from your highest ideals, it gets you back on track, right? So you reveal what matters most to you, and you do it every day. There's a repetitive quality and there's an intention. And against the backdrop of this repetition, you'll begin to notice how your mind works. Begin to see through things, begin to kind of almost, when you start thinking really catastrophic thoughts or negative thoughts or maybe heartless thoughts, you catch yourself. Now, one of the takeaways of facing the reality of death and going through the grief process is that we're forced by the pain of loss to reevaluate all of our values. Everything is into question. What we thought was real is no longer real sometimes, especially if it's a sudden death out of nowhere. So through the sickness process and the death process and the bereavement process, we find out who our real friends are and what matters the most to us in life. So the things that matter to most of us, we find are love, forgiveness, family, friends, kindness, and mercy. And so these are things, so we want to learn to tune into those more than we used to. And through the pain of loss, we'll define what it is we take refuge in. And each person is different flavors of different, we require different levels of socializing, and different relations with family might be different. So each person has a different flavor. And it's also through the pain of loss that we're forced to deepen our sense of compassion, both for ourselves and for others. And compassion, not just for our friends and loved ones, we can also deepen our compassion towards strangers and even towards the people that have harmed us in the past. And this intimate and widening circle of compassion towards self and others is, in fact, post-traumatic growth. So, in other words, I'll repeat it: the deepening and the widening circle of compassion, so that you can even forgive people who've harmed you, towards self and others, is post-traumatic growth. So, this is growth not as in growing taller and bigger and stronger, although you will become more resilient. This is growth as compassion, as surrender, as in pull down thy vanity, as in learning to be more humble and learning to live from our heart rather than our ego. Now, refuge and compassion practices are the foundation and the radical root of a ritual healing practice. And again, it can be a spiritual practice or an atheist practice. Again, at the end of the day, we always have to ask ourselves when we're going through the grief process, what do I want to have foremost in my heart and mind moving forward in life, even as I myself move slowly towards my own inevitable death? So we're learning to reprioritize. So it's a gentle preparation for future losses and deaths, including our own, and that preparation will make us more resilient and more patient, larger. No doubt, in the early phases of grief, some of us will go through a period of spiritual struggle where we feel abandoned by the universe or the fates or karma or God, if you will. We can become frozen in pain and unable to sleep, unable to think straight. Some of us will go through this dark night of the soul, and it can last for weeks, and very painful. Many of us, myself included, if we go through this, benefit deeply by talking to someone such as a spiritual counselor or a psychotherapist. And sometimes it takes more than just our circle of friends. We need an outsider who we can unload with, and it can really help. When I went through my dark night of the soul in 2011, I saw my therapist 2 times a week for 6 weeks before I ratcheted down to weekly sessions. Therapy helps, absolutely. It helps. It's also expensive when you do it twice a week. But what many people don't understand is that psychotherapy is only 1 hour a week, but healing is a 24/7 job. Healing, becoming whole again, even takes place when we sleep, and especially when we dream. So what we're doing with developing a private practice ritual, a daily intimate practice ritual, is where we can learn certain insights that will shape in our weekly psychotherapy session, and then we can, kind of meditate on them and slowly learn to actualize them, learn from them. Now, I started seriously practicing Tibetan Buddhism back in 1988. I was 25 years old at the time, but it wasn't until my grief journey in 2011, when I was 48, that I developed the daily morning ritual. It took me 23 years to start practicing as though my mental well-being really depended on it. And here's how it works now. As I wake up in the morning, I have a biological break. I use the bathroom. I go to the kitchen. I get a cup of coffee with milk. And I sit down and on my meditation cushion, and I begin my daily practice ritual. And this consists of a number of different things I've cobbled together over the years, a bespoke practice ritual. Most of it comes out of the traditions I've studied and the teachers I've had, gurus, lamas. But it includes 9 purification breathings. It includes breath retention and simple yoga movements, kind of like Wim Hof method. It includes sky gazing, which is a type of meditation. It includes refuge prayers and invocation of my lineage teachers. It includes compassion prayers, specifically Tonglen, which is the exchanging of self and other, where I take in the pain of someone in my mind's eye, someone I'm thinking of, and I give them healing. I take in their pain and I give them blessings or light, well-being. Another practice I do is Guru Yoga, which is merging my mind as one with the mind of my spiritual teachers, the wisdom mind. And then I also do a lot of recitation of poetry. Poetry was always very important to me. It's through poetry that I met my Buddhist practice. So they're tied together, both involving sound vibrations and vocalizations and language arts. And so I have a lineage of poets, Ted Berrigan, Ezra Pound, John Keats, Geoffrey Chaucer, that I recite in the morning. And then I do another session of breath retentions and some more sky gazing meditation. And then I close the session by offering any merits gained during the practice to the welfare of all beings. Okay? So I'm not just practicing for my own benefit, but for the welfare of all beings. That's a certain non-dual approach that's very helpful, because you can kind of get a little rigid and puff yourself up, and when you dedicate your practice to all beings, it keeps things loose and open. Now, this sounds like a lot, that list I just read of my daily practice, and but it takes way less than an hour, maybe 30 minutes. So it's not so bad. I really enjoy it, look forward to it. I have to, and it's nice. I'm waking up with my coffee too, so I'm also getting spiked a little on the caffeine, right? So the point is that you wake up in the morning, and preferably before you speak to anyone else, you bathe your mind in your deepest and highest principles, both in terms of ultimate wisdom and in terms of compassion. Eventually, over many years or decades, there are levels of this, but after many years or decades, these higher ideals or highest ideals will become your baseline norm. And to some degree, you experience everyday life and even your dreams through the lens of your wisdom mind and higher aspirations. So you're not that, just a reactive. You're not lost in defense mechanisms. You've cultivated healthy coping mechanisms and values. And so your highest ideals become more and more reflexive and effortless. And then ultimately your intimate daily ritual will make you more vast in the long run, more fluid. And you can contrast this to a more ordinary life devoted to, waking up and being stressed about the workday, to-do lists, maybe holding grudges, strategizing office politics, reading the New York Times on your phone, checking in with various social medias, maybe some doom scrolling about the wars here and there, watching the clock, clearing out your email inbox, and getting ready to make more and more money so you can spend more and more money. The old, we're wired and for survival and reproduction, for getting and spending, we're wired for sex and money. So, and these are all good. I mean, we need to take care of things in the real world and make a good living so we can, have a nice place to live. But we can get a little lost in it. So what I'm offering is another way to go in and reevaluate our values, what really matters to us in the big picture. It's a long game. Now, daily healing ritual practice unwinds us step by step a little bit from our habitual contracted sense of reality into something larger within us, something freer, vaster, more expansive and hopeful. Humans, especially grieving humans, need hope. Humans need hope. And so we need to tap into those things that give us hope and inspiration and meaning. Of course, my strange faith in a non-theistic religion, Buddhism, will not be very real to most of you. Quite the opposite. Some of you might even be slightly disturbed by my personal meaning-making strategy. The point is that I want to provide, by way of example, a template for how you can develop your own ritualized healing practice. Now, at the risk of repeating myself, refuge and compassion practices are the foundation and the radical root of ritual healing. What do I take refuge in, and how can I be kinder to myself and others? Again and again, ask yourself, what matters the most to me at the end of the day? What do I want to have foremost in my heart and mind on a daily basis as I move towards my own inevitable aging and sickness and death? What do I take refuge in? Now, my personal refuge goes something like this. I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, the Lama, the Yidam, the Khandro, the Sa, the Lung, the Tile, the essence, the nature, the energy. The essence is empty. The nature is luminous. And the nature and the energy is all pervading. Now, those sound a little arcane, a lot of those terms, and they come out of my specific esoteric Buddhism. And so I won't get lost in the weeds explaining them to you. But the point is that my refuge involves various levels of being, from the everyday material world to the more intellectual and artistic world, to the luminous and expansive world, or spiritual world, if you will. So you have these different levels of being that we pay attention to. On a more secular note, I also take refuge in a lineage of poets that involves writers I've met, including Allen Ginsberg, I studied under, and Philip Whalen and Robert Creeley, and even those I haven't studied under, but I feel close to a connection to, going back to Chaucer, Dante, and Homer. So I just love poetry. I love the idea of lineage. It keeps me in touch with my roots. And there are many lineages. There's a spiritual lineage for me. I have a spiritual lineage, poetry lineage, biological lineage. I can go back and name my ancestors for about 10 generations, believe it or not. But yeah, so in all three of those are different. Again, they're different levels of refuge. But once again, and I stress this, is that the core practices are refuge and compassion. Okay, what do I take refuge in? What matters most to me? And how can I be kinder to myself and others? Now, there are many different compassion practices. My core compassion practice is something called Tonglen, which means Tonglen is a Tibetan word that translates to sending and receiving. It involves visualizing someone in front of you and sending them warmth and light on the out breath, and taking in their pain, confusion, and darkness on the in breath. So you're taking in their suffering and sending them your healing, so to speak. You're taking in their darkness and you're sending them light. You're taking in their pain and you're sending them relief or peace of mind. So at Tonglen, it's quite easy to learn how to do with the loved ones. We can go back and practice Tonglen with the people who loved us and were kind to us as children, maybe our grandparents, and certainly our friends, our mother if we're lucky, a sibling. We can go back and practice with our loved ones, our inner circle, and then we move out to strangers, and that's just people on the street or the highway. When we're driving on the highway, we can see ourselves as sending them love and kindness, these strangers on the highway or the road, and taking in their pain. So it's a great subway practice, also, of course. Now, the challenge in practicing Tonglen is with people that have harmed us. But that's where the real growth comes, is when we when we go back and we have someone who's harmed us, and we send them love and kindness, and we take in their pain, and we understand them as a construct of many different causes and conditions, and sort of the end of the blame game, and we can go back, and maybe our loved one died, our wife, and we weren't always the perfect person, the perfect spouse or partner, and we can go back and remember those moments where we were less than our best or less than we can be, and we can take in the pain that we were in when we did that, and we can give healing. In other words, we can heal ourselves and the memory of ourselves that's within ourselves, which sounds a bit odd, but it's okay. It's also, Tonglen's a perfect seance vehicle. It's a way to connect with people who've died, since we were children. Whoever's died, we can always go back to them and send them, loving kindness and take in their discomfort. Okay, so there we've covered a lot of lineage and compassion, and I think that's enough with Tibetan Buddhism, because I'm not Tibetan. And most of you watching this are also not Tibetan, and I myself, although I do numerous prayers and practices in Tibetan and Sanskrit, but even there are some practices I've tried where I just can't do it. It's too culturally bound, and I feel like I'm plain Indian when I do some of the practices, but others really just fit, and they really make sense to me. And by way of explaining where I come from, I was raised Episcopalian in suburban St. Louis, and the fact is, you can develop a similar sadhana, morning practice, daily ritual, based around the Christian tradition, say of the Book of Common Prayer. This is the book in the Episcopal and Anglican traditions, and Catholics have missals, and so you can develop something with the Book of Common Prayer and memorizing passages from the Bible, and you can combine this with the teachings of the Christian mystics, such as Saint Teresa of Avila, or Saint John of the Cross, or Saint Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuit order. And of course, the same goes for Judaism and the Kabbalah, or Islam and Sufism. These all have their written tradition, and then they have their secret esoteric mystic traditions, and you can combine those. And I think it's important regarding religion and spirituality that a social tradition is grounded in community, and history is important, but so is an intimate daily private practice. Okay, so we need both, and these two can inform each other. Religion with other people and practiced in common, the Book of Common Prayer for everyone together, and we can also bring it in intimately in our all alone morning hour practice. And of course, you could easily develop a secular practice based around the writings of some of the great existentialists, such as Jean-Paul Sartre, or Albert Camus, or Martin Heidegger, Friedrich Nietzsche. You could go back into Platonism. You could develop something around Socrates and Plato and Plotinus and Porphyry and Iamblichus and Proclus. There's a whole lineage of these Neoplatonism. And I'd like to talk about one of my mentors, who's the existential psychologist Irvin Yalom, who combines the meaning-making and responsibility of their existentialism with the radical acceptance of Stoicism. So he's called the Stoicism, and Stoicism will appeal to a lot of you. It's in our rational age. It appeals in a way. Stoicism is like kind of like Buddhism, a lot like Buddhism, but without the leap of faith that Buddhism can play with. Now, Irvin Yalom, one of his daily habits rituals is a daily writing ritual. And so he's published about 9 works of fiction and some of the most respected nonfiction works in the field of psychology. So he loves to write. If he hadn't become a psychiatrist, he would have been a writer. In fact, he is both. He's still alive. In a private conversation I had with Irvin Yalom a few years back, he shared that after his wife of 65 years died, Marilyn, 65 years they'd been married, she died. he found great strength in going back and rereading his own novels to himself. So we laughed at the narcissism of it, but his ritual writing habit had helped him to home in on the deepest crystallizations of his ideals as expressed in his own language. So he asked himself, what matters most to me? And it's these expressions are crystal, they're little luminous moments where everything comes together in his novels. And so as he reread his own works to himself, he'd say, hey, that's pretty good. Wait, did I write that? And it helped him to remind him to his better self. And that helped him a lot in working through that grief. Married 65 years. So it's tough when you lose a partner you've known since, in his case, they'd known each other since they were 14 or 15. So that's hard when you grow up and develop with someone and that person dies. So, but I'd like, so far I've been a little heavy on spirituality, and now I've entered existentialism. And it's important, though, to remember that there are many paths to immortality that don't include spirituality, mysticism, or religion. Immortality, how can we be larger than just this body, just this life? Some of these might include bringing children into the world that will hopefully outlast us. They'll live and procreate, and the lineage will continue if the planet lets us. Another approach to immortality is making or appreciating art and literature that's something that's going to be around longer than we will be. And even if we don't become famous, some of us will make good art or literature that can be passed down the family line. Or you can just study art and feel connected with something larger than yourself. You can dig into Dante or Homer and be in communion with something that's thousands of years old. It's larger than just this 61-year-old body, that's going to die. The final form of tapping into the immortal is to reflect on the love we've given and received in this life. So Irvin Yalom refers to this as rippling, as in a stone thrown in a still pond, reverberating concentric rings of love that will continue to ripple through the generations. So the love that I gave my girls when they were little, I have two daughters, 22 and 26, the love that I planted in them, they continue to spread to their friends and lovers, and they eventually their children. And so in that sense, there's some part of us that continues, And yeah, this is important to think of something larger than just this life, just to deal with, so that we can kind of learn to be friends with death anxiety, very real. Then, of course, many people find deep meaning in the natural world. The natural world is going to be here long after we're gone. The mountains and rivers will be here long after we're gone. They were here before we arrived, and they'll continue. So people find meaning and hope in the natural world. They find strength and resilience through nature mysticism informed by hiking in the woods, bird watching, reading Neoplatonic transcendentalists such as Ralph Waldo Emerson or Henry David Thoreau. And obviously you can base a morning ritual around these things. My best friend from college, Paul Emart, he likes to garden first thing every morning, at least when the weather's fine. That's what he does. He goes out and pulls weeds and waters and does things. Gets his fingers in it, feels the sun on his face and the moisture in the air. And I had my maternal grandmother, my mother's mother, combined nature mysticism with reading the Bible. Every morning, before she spoke to anyone, she'd sit in front of a picture window, and would alternate reciting Bible with stopping to notice the changing leaves and light and clouds outside. And she always was noting the 4 seasons coming and going, and was very aware of the birds at her bird feeder. She was a birder even when she was younger. And And as I discussed earlier, that's nature. And another thing is to develop an artistic lineage. Now you can do this through if you love painting, you can have a painting lineage going back, or film lineage, or musical lineage. It's nice to remember our heroes. In some ways, it sounds weird, but hero worship is very important for keeping us on track with what we really love. As they say, what thou lovest remains, and the rest is dross. We don't want to let ourselves get caught up too much in consumer mind and advertising mind. We used to call it shopping mall mind when I was in high school. That shopping malls don't exist. But that's something I do myself for meaning making, is I take refuge in the poetry lineage. I think it's hard to deny that the very best writing, painting, film, and music often have an aura of the divine to them. And so as part of my daily morning ritual, I practice what I sometimes call the church of poetry, the church of poetry, or the religion of poetry. I recite a lot of different poets, some of my own stuff, and Keats and Chaucer and Ted Berrigan, Ezra Pound, or sometimes Robert Herrick, Andrew Marvell, Sir Thomas Wyatt. I love all the old stuff, Walt Whitman. So one thing I really almost always recite, though, is John Keats's poem To Autumn. By way of a bio, John Keats, and this is going back to hero worship and how we can learn from people who've lived before us. John Keats was born in London in 1795, and sadly he experienced a lot of serious childhood trauma. His father died from a horseback riding accident when he was about 8 years old, and his mother died when he was 14. Okay, and so there was some childhood trauma. And when Keats was 23, he nursed his brother Tom, as he died of tuberculosis. So he was the caregiver for his brother Tom. And it was while nursing his brother that he contracted the disease himself. And he went on to die of tuberculosis at the age of 25. Now it's strange. Keats, he doesn't write a lot about grief per se, at least not directly. But it's safe to say that he knew what it was to have a mind disordered from trauma, loss, and grief. And his best works have an otherworldly synesthesia to them. They're loaded with a strange, bruised sensibility and tenderness. And Keats wasn't religious. He saw the world not as a vale of tears with heaven waiting afterwards, but he saw the world as a veil of soul making, he called it. In other words, the world offers us a chance to experience intense beauty in the natural world, and to making lasting works of art ourselves, or at least appreciating them. So like a good pre-war blues singer, Keats's art comes from a place of heavy pain that's transformed into the transcendent. It shakes it out through him. For Keats, beauty was truth, truth was beauty, and beauty was healing for him. Beauty was healing for him. So there's an overlap between healing and art for him. Probably his most well-known poem is called To Autumn, and it was written in 1819 about the aesthetic highs of the English countryside in autumn, when the fields, if you're in the Midwest, you'll see a cornfield. It's a stubble plain, and there's these wonderful sunsets over the stubble plain, or there might be obviously the leaves turn. That everyone enjoys that in the autumn. There's certain slant of light that's special. There's a crispness in the air, and the images and the music of his poem To Autumn wake us up to the realities of autumnal dying, of the reality of death, which is painful and horrible. But it's natural. And traditionally, poetry had been written about spring, and the rebirth, and understandably the rebirth. But he was finding beauty also in autumn, and so his works wakes us up to the realities of autumnal dying, but also to the ripeness, wonder, and fulfillment that is all around us all the time, even right here and right now in front of your computer watching this screen. It may not be in nature, but inspiration and beauty is in many ways a state of mind. And I'm going to recite the poem for you, and then we'll open it to questions. And again, this is a poem about autumn. So we each have our own visualizations of what a beautiful autumn day entails. And so you can imagine, and there's many different types of beauty in autumn. This first stanza opens with September or more, and then it moves on towards November. And it's in the English countryside, farm territory. Okay, I'll read the poem. Season of mists and mellow fruitfulness, close bosom friend of the maturing sun, conspiring with him how to load and bless with fruit the vines that round the thatch eaves run, to bend with apples the mossed cottage trees, and fill all fruit with a ripeness to the core, to swell the gourd and plump the hazel shells with a sweet kernel to swell, to set budding more and still more later flowers for the bees, until they think warm days will never cease, for summer has overbrimmed their clammy cells. Who hath not seen thee oft amid thy store? Sometimes whoever seeks abroad will find thee sitting careless on a granary floor, thy hair soft lifted by the winnowing wind, or on a half-reaped furrow, sound asleep, drowsed with the fume of poppies, while thy hook spares the next swath and all its twined flowers. And sometimes like a gleaner thou dost keep steady thy laden head across a brook, or by a cider press with patient look, as thou watchest the last oozings hours by hours. Where are the songs of spring? Ah, where are they? Think not of them. Thou hast thy music too, while barred clouds bloom the soft dying day, and touch the stubble plains with a rosy hue. Then in a wailful choir the small gnats mourn among the river sallows, borne aloft or sinking as the light wind lives or dies, and full-grown lambs loud bleat from hilly bourne. Hedge crickets sing, and now with treble soft the redbreast whistles from a garden croft, and gathering swallows twitter in the sky. So that's to autumn. That's to autumn. And thank you guys. So that's those are a couple ways to develop a morning ritual and help train the mind and heart.
Thank you, Matt. That's great.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you.
I'd like to open it up for question and answer time now. We have a person who writes, my son, 15 years old, died of cancer. 2 weeks later, my sister had a huge barbecue party and became angry with me because we didn't attend. How could I forgive her for not being there for me?
Well, it's hard. It's hard. It takes time. But the way to look at it is not thinking of your sister as just your sister, but as a construct of causes and conditions. Now, meaning, in other words, I don't know what her childhood was or how she felt neglected or what her relationship was with you or something, but it's a way to sort of begin to look behind the person and see how they came to be together, and not be less focused, more diffuse a little bit. And and then of course in Tibetan Buddhism we have past lives, so maybe part of the reason she's such a difficult customer and cold, arguably cruel even, is that her past lives, things happened to her in her past lives. That is the one useful thing about past lives, which I can't claim to know past lives, but I find it a very useful way of looking at the world. Yeah.
We have another question. Says, Matt, are you familiar with Thomas Merton's centering prayer? If so, what are your thoughts about it?
I know a little bit about it. From what I understand, every person has a different centering prayer. For me, my centering prayer when I was going through my tough patch in 2011 was the love is within. The love is within. I came upon it in the middle of the night during one of those dark nights of the soul. And so by saying this prayer, and not asking for the love to come from without, I kind of just found it within, and eventually I'd find my way back to sleep. But everyone has their own centering prayer, from what I understand, and we have to find that a bit on a. I think it's very useful. I very much believe in the centering prayer. Thomas Merton's a fascinating man, and you know, he was involved in Tibetan Buddhism also near the end of his life. First Zen and then Tibetan Buddhism before he died in an accident there. I think it was in Bangkok. Yeah, he's a hero. Yeah.
I have a question, Matt. You were talking about some of the more esoteric and spiritual aspects of some mainstream religions, specifically Christianity and Judaism. And why do you think that those more esoteric beliefs like Kabbalah are not more mainstream and are sort of more front and center in some of the mainstream religions? There's sort of something that you really have to seek out with intention.
Yeah, well, maybe that's good. It's a little overdone. I think the religious systems were able to get by with just creating a community practice on a weekly basis, temple or church. This is Judaism and Christianity, and they've always been somewhat threatened by the mystic or esoteric figures in their traditions, but so they kept it secret and hidden, and almost killed it, nearly extinguished it. Now these days, in the last 30 years, maybe last 60 years, since Buddhism, 1960, when 55, they say Jack Kerouac was reading the Buddhist Bible in the early 50s, and he wrote the scripture of the Golden Eternity, and Gary Snyder and Philip Whalen. These guys were poets who found Buddhism, but now it's become so commonplace that a lot of the self-help and spiritual bestsellers are of a Buddhist persuasion. So there's this need for the contemplative, for the intimate, for an intimate daily practice, and that's coming back. And so I think Judaism, some of the Jewish lineages, churches, synagogues, and the Christian tradition also are becoming more open to the contemplative, a little more forward with it than they were 30, 40 years ago. Yeah.
We have another viewer who writes, Matt, you talk about your daily rituals, which you do in the question about morning rituals. What was the third component after breathing and meditating?
Oh, breathing and meditating. Let me think. Well, there's breathing and meditating. I'm trying to remember where I said that exactly. Well, there's the three what they call in my tradition the constituents of being are the body, the speech, and the mind. So we have to take care of our body with our posture and alignment and movements, and then there's the speech, which is breathing or mantra, and then the third is mind. Knowing, getting to know actually the light of the mind is the goal, right? Did that answer?
Yeah, I think that should do well. Thank you. Okay. Just looking how we're doing for time. We've got a couple of more questions. We got a lot of people that are writing in, which is terrific. Another viewer writes, when my wife died, I made a vow that I would not give up on love and that I would someday fall in love and get married again. Is this compatible with ritual practice?
It's absolutely, it's compatible with ritual practice. The ritual practice, maybe you need a year or two to get your head together and find the love within, and then you can be ready to meet new people. It's often a rebound relationship isn't the best idea for grieving people out, as we all know. But yeah, you can combine the two. As you heal yourself, you'll become more loving and lovable, and if anything, it will attract a beautiful woman to you. And you'll be so full of love, it'll be oozing out, and they'll want to be around it. It'll be okay, hopefully.
We have another question about how one does deal, as you mentioned before, about the anger component. And a viewer writes that you mentioned anger at the universe and anger at the deity to which you might pray to, and you say it might go on for weeks or months. What happens if it goes on longer than that?
Yeah, we can get stuck. The best thing to do is to find a therapist or a spiritual counselor that validates your anger, that validates your struggle. And if someone tries to argue with you and say, "Oh, why don't be, tamp it down, or don't be angry, or stop being so uptight," you want to you have to, sometimes you have to validate something to give it room. Like the saying goes, the way to tame a crazy horse is to give it a larger pasture, right? Not to beat it into a corner or correct it. It's sometimes it just needs a lot of room and time to romp. But yeah, if you get really stuck in the long, you can run into some trouble. It's good to have, if you get too stuck, it's good to have professional help. Okay.
All right, let me just see. I think we have one more question here. It says, how do you spell Tenlin, and do you have a website?
I think the word is Tonglen, and you can look that up. You can find lots of teachings, lots of writings on it, and YouTube videos, and probably podcast interviews. Tonglen, it's all one word, Tonglen, and that means sending and receiving. Again, that's taking in another person's pain and sending them relief and pleasure and hope, light. I don't have a website right now. I do have a website. I have a website for not a website, but I'm online as a therapist in many sources. Just type in Matthew Morse psychotherapist, and you can read all about me and reach out to me if you want. If you like.
Great.
Yeah.
I would second also your views on Irvin Yalom. Is it help make sure I pronounce his name correct? It's Irwin or Irvin?
Irvin, Irvin.
Yalom, Yolum or OM? OM,
Yeah.
right. I remember when he said something about the purpose of life, and he said the meaning of life, I'm paraphrasing, of course, is not to question it, but to just be part of it, like the river, and let the question just drift away. I suppose that's just to be in it and to be part of it, rather than to excessively question everything, which I think is a quote that stuck with me.
Yeah, he's beautiful. He has a great book on death called Staring at the Sun. It's all about death, and he's worked a lot within what's called psycho-oncology. He's one of the founders of doing cancer support groups. Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. This has been a great conversation, Matt. Thanks so much for coming on, and your insights really help shine a light on the role of ritual and finding your footing after a profound loss. If you have further questions for Matt, who offers therapy via Zoom, he can be reached at Matthew Morse 9, and that's the number 9, at gmail.com, or the phone is 646-872-6840. I'd like to thank all of you for coming tonight. The questions were great, and we want you to know, as we said up top, that you're not alone. Always feel free to reach out to us. And if you want more info, email us or check out our websites, nationalwidowers.org and mensgriefnetwork.org, where you'll find many resources and links to this and other workshops available on our YouTube channel. And don't forget to join us the last Wednesday of every month for our NWO Zoom workshops at 8:30 EST, Eastern Standard Time. Next month, our June 26th workshop will be on the topic, fascinating one, on ketamine as a potential aid in grief work. And Matt will be back to talk about a relatively new therapy, ketamine, which has been shown to promote the growth of new connections in the brain, which can help interrupt the cycle of persistent sadness and despair that often accompany grief. I think that'll be a great conversation to have next month on June 26th. And don't forget, tomorrow, Thursday, May 30th, is National Men in Grief Day. And join us for a special web broadcast with Harold Ivan tomorrow as well. The topic of our special webinar is Surviving Days When Pulling the Covers Over Your Head is Not a Good Option. I can speak from personal experience on that one too. And if you missed any part of tonight's webcast, would like to watch it again or send the link to a friend or loved one, the links are posted on the Men's Grief Network website, the MGN Facebook page, and the Men's Grief Network YouTube channels. You can also watch all past webinars on the Men's Grief Network YouTube channel. And if you have suggestions for future workshops, email us at info@nationalwidowers.org. Check out our mensgriefnetwork.org and nationalwidowers.org. We depend on your feedback to serve you better, so please keep in touch with us and let us know what you'd like to see more of or less of. And if you're watching us on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe. That really helps get the word out to other widowers. And hit the bell to be alerted of all upcoming NWO webinars. Again, thanks very much, Matt, and to all of you who joined us tonight. I'm your host, Ken Levy. Take good care of yourself, and good night.
Good night. Thank you, Ken.